Good afternoon and welcome to the NARF Industries PLC Ranger launch and annual results overview. Throughout the recorded meeting, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and they can be submitted at any time by the Q&A tab situated in the right corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review the questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to the Executive Chairman, John Herring. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Thank you, Alessandro, for setting that up, and good afternoon to everybody who's joining us today. We have, looking at the list of participants, a number of long-term shareholders who've been following the company, so it's great to have that following, and also a few new. I don't want to belabor a lot of history of the company here. The purpose of this call really is to get to Ranger.ai, our product capability we announced in June, July time as being ready. And those who have followed us have known that that's been a big focus of ours during the previous reporting period. I do at the start want to take a minute to acknowledge that we did get out our annual report and we completed our audit, and to tell you that I was disappointed in our revenue performance for the year. I think we'd guided quite a bit, even starting in May of 24, about the expecting a decline in revenue as we began to pay attention to the Ranger AI capability and invest in that. And Steve will be providing a lot of good justification that they provided to the board of doing that. So we as a board was good to go along with that shift. We saw the importance of it and knew there would be some revenue impact, but we were surprised as the year had gone on. About in May or so, we began to see the historic U.S. budget had not been approved, and so that had delayed. So we were experiencing some delays. We expected to catch up some from that. We moved into the summertime, picked up some good contracts, got a follow-on for social cyber, and that began to fit well. And a lot of the GS&S work that had been impacted by the earlier budget delay, we had gone to other prime contractors who had relationships with those customers, and they were picking up those contracts and taking them in, and so felt very good about that. So in the November timeframe, after we had gotten our 6 months results, which were down quite a bit to 1.8 million in revenue, as we looked at the opportunities that were being presented, and this was, I think, November 7th, we put out our latest guidance. It was looking like we would recover to some extent in the upcoming months. We knew we had a very large contract coming, which we did announce $6.8 million. So that was our largest contract to date. We saw some good momentum going into some other areas, but right after about November, end of November, the new administration came in, and unexpectedly we had DOGE come in, and that just kind of brought everything to a halt. So we were impacted by those budget delays, and so that ended up with some big prime contracts we'd expected not coming through by the end of the year, because these prime contractors had no idea where money was coming from, so they failed to move forward. And it did delay a couple of the other projects. I would say going forward, we've kind of recovered from that. We're seeing good activity coming in. So you saw our revenue was at about 3 million. That was about a 50% annualized decline from where we were. To the credit of the company, cash flow was managed very well. Just like investors had impact to their value, a lot of us had impact to the value that we were getting from the company in regards to salaries and all, and we were sensitive to that. So I think everybody gave their fair share in trying to get through this period. One of the key things we've stressed to management is that we cannot access capital at these low share values. And so we got to kill what we got to eat what we kill. And they've done very good with that. And we're now in a good position as we've entered this current year. I'm not going to give any revenue forecast at this time, but I will tell you that just based on our current GR&D backlog, that we have and some things that we're aware of that are closing here in the near term, there's probably $4 to $4.5 million of revenue for this coming fiscal year in that. So just to give you a feeling that we do have a good base entering this year. And again, as we've said, we've kind of managed our capital and all. And with our core plan we're presenting here and where we're going, we don't need access to capital. Access to capital is great. We could go a lot faster, but the trade-off until we show value is just not there. So anyway, I appreciate everybody working with us. We'll be giving more clarification. Again, that number that I just presented did not have any contributions coming from Ranger.ai. We do expect some very good ones, and Steve will be addressing that. So I just wanted to get that on the table of where we're at the beginning and kind of acknowledge that and let you know that, again, I'm disappointed, but certainly there were some factors that even management couldn't see Doge coming along and what we ended up with at the end of the year. So anyway, I think we've planned for that. All right, given that, so I'm going to turn it over to Steve Bassey, our CEO. You'll see a couple of additional faces on here as we're beginning to expand. This is our product team. Steve will go through introductions with him here in a minute when he gets to the appropriate point in the slides. Steve, you want to comment on your poor performance on revenue?
No, I think I'm gonna look towards the future rather than belabor the past, as you presciently pointed out. But I'll get into a bit of that. Let's go ahead and start off and set the agenda. Some of you may have heard me speak about this before, but we're really going to talk about what Ranger.ai focuses on, and it's that open source software is really critical infrastructure. We'll talk about the $9 trillion in investment that's already been made in open source and why companies are building on it. We'll talk a little bit about how they consume it, why it's critical. We'll talk, and then we'll start talking about the product team and what we're doing with Ranger.ai, as well as where we've gotten to with 1.0 and where we plan on going with initial customers and as we add more agentic features to it. Last, we'll talk a little bit more about go-to-market and other items that we plan on launching in the next 6 months. In terms of commercial availability and expansion beyond government with Ranger. And then finally, we'll sort of review any questions that came in as stragglers and get through those at the end of the deck. So draw your attention first to, there was a Harvard Business School report that came out a while back that was quite interesting. And the gist of it was that open source software basically has received a lot of investment over the years, and companies are deciding to build on it, and it ends up pretty much everywhere in modern day software. So the real headline here is it cost about $9 trillion if it were to be created from scratch today. So it has become both critical infrastructure and infrastructure that people have decided to build on for better or worse. And we'll talk a little bit about the worst part of it and how we help in that. So as this has become pervasive, you see there's a couple metrics around this, right? 96% of code bases that people use or the code within it has some open source component to it or some open source DNA, if you want to think of it that way. By open source, we mean that software that's built by effectively random people on the internet, either sponsored by a company or as a hobbyist or in their free time. But it turns out that people building this code, as software is in the world, a lot of people are building on top of existing open source, using it as a dependency or using it, as sort of the framework that runs their higher level applications that they're building for their company, their enterprise. So that means it's become pervasive in the software world today. And this bears out in the numbers, the consumption numbers, right? If you look at various stats from various providers, I want to focus your attention on the fact that 2024 saw about 6.6 trillion downloads of various open source components. Now, we ultimately don't know and have great breakdown in those downloads on how they were consumed ultimately, but you can be sure that a lot of them have ended up in products and services that you've used in their day to day. If you sent an email today or browsed a website, I would be willing to wager there's 100% you've touched some open source software along the way, and it has been processing critical data related to everything from your identity to financial transactions. So at a high level, and if we want to use analogies here, it's basically the wiring of the modern world, right? It's built into every product and service, but few really ask, who installed that wiring? Is it maintained? And is it safe to continue using, right? Are we using electrical codes from the 1930s still, or are we using modern 2025 electrical standards and practices? So as this is the invisible infrastructure that powers pretty much everything people have come to rely on, it's often unknown and unvetted who's contributing to this code base. And that's a massive overlooked risk, one that the industry is very much starting to wake up to. So the challenge then becomes reducing risk at the relentless pace of open source software. So as people have continued to build on top of open source software, the developers and other contributors to open source software continue to add new features, functionality, and fixes to it. Keeping up with all the contributors or the human layers of these open source projects, if you depend on tens of them, is difficult enough. If you depend on hundreds of these open source projects, then it's way more difficult. And these projects not only are the contributors the building blocks, but the source code they contribute is also very specialized. It's very dense reading. If you ever want to fall asleep at night, reading an open source code base is a pretty good way to start down that road. And keeping pace with the updates, the velocity behind which these projects move across tens or hundreds of projects is difficult, costly, and requires expertise. And we talked about this all the way from the spring of last year, right? We were involved in some tooling and some work for our Air Force customer, understanding how the impact of this almost backdoor that ended up in open source software may have affected them and how to prevent it in the future. And this is kind of a sign that we see attacks on this infrastructure accelerating, right? And threats against this infrastructure, because everything is built on it. Everything from the Linux kernel to all web servers that you use today have some open source component in it. This is a really juicy target for malicious actors to be able to take advantage of. And they take advantage of it in two ways, right? One is basically deliberate backdoors in the project itself, or looking for security vulnerabilities that developers either wittingly or unwittingly introduce into these projects that people deeply depend on. On top of all this, tracking contributions to the open source projects, understanding the risk if your company has largely built things on the software, we have quite an acceleration in the regulatory requirements and frameworks. And I want to point if you guys are closer to the EU than we are, but there's been a lot of talk about product liability extending into software lately, specifically in the EU. And this is a really big deal and an interesting caveat around the regulatory stuff, because now, even if you take advantage of the $9 trillion investment that's already been made in open source software and sort of stand on the shoulders of those giants to build your own products, you're still not only liable for your own source code, but you're also liable for the open source code that you choose to include in your products and services, right? So, if you're building a self-driving car and it, runs off the road and hurts somebody because of software, or if you're, using some vulnerable open source code to manage your customer database and that leaks, under most of these regulatory frameworks, there's some regulatory effect or liability that arises from that. So the real question becomes, how do you de-risk your leveraging of that $9 trillion open source investment? And for us, this leads to a significant market opportunity, right? We sort of exist at this crossroads between traditional open source security and leveraging this code safely, as well as the larger software security market. And we think for us that represents kind of a rough intersection of about $45 billion TAM. So at this point, I'll talk to you how we're addressing this TAM and we'll talk a little bit about our product team. We have some select members from the product team today here at NARF. We've got Dr. Michael Locasto. He's our CTO and has been responsible for a lot of the R&D and recent DARPA wins, as well as past DARPA wins that have gotten us to this point with Ranger 1.0. Dr. Sean Carrick is not on this call today. This is very early for him, and he works very late. But he's responsible for applying these technologies to the more arcane and black magic side of things on the binary security vulnerabilities. We have Greg Rusas, who is our lead developer on this side, and he's been working tirelessly in the last few months, adding our Agentic AI capabilities to the platform and getting us towards a second release beyond 1.0 that really scales out to meet some of these challenges we've just discussed and address some of the challenges that we've seen from our initial customers of this platform. And we have Stuart Nagy-Cato on the call as well. He's sort of leading the product development and management of our day-to-day dev tasks, so he's here as well with us. And I'll be handing off different components of the slides, which they can explain a little bit better than I can, and then talk to those as we go along. So we talked about the pervasiveness of OSS. We talked about how companies are using it to build stuff on, but we didn't really talk about the nitty gritty and how they're deploying this and where this thing ends up as critical infrastructure. So a lot of what we're focused on with Ranger is the fact that people take open source components and cobble those together into a scaffolding for their larger project. These open source components are known as dependencies, and they are often sort of critical components of a custom application that somebody is writing for their enterprise. What's important here is that custom application ends up handling very, very sensitive and valuable data, or is relied upon in life or death situations, anywhere from hospital record keeping all the way to there's a ton of open source technology on things like the F-35 and larger multi-billion-dollar military expenditures. Critically, and to our customers, open source software actually handles a fair bit of classified information, which you may be surprised to learn. Now, granted, when it does this, it's in something called an air gap, meaning it exists in a software enclave, in a cluster or software enclave that's not connected to the internet. But it's still pretty important that people understand security issues and vulnerabilities that exist in these classified and sensitive enclaves that are due to open source software. And oftentimes, the problem with using open source in building your applications and how it's become critical infrastructure is there's a deep underappreciation of the resources required to understand and manage the risks that taking code that some random guy on the internet developed and running it on your sensitive system presents, right? So we've seen a lot of really, really good engagement and initial usage of our results around certain areas that we'll talk about in a minute. But really, our customers have been eye-opened by the diversity and geographic origin of who's developing their source code that exists on their critical systems. We've talked a bit about the potential for backdoors, or what we call bug doors. So these are unintentional backdoors into systems that are due to software vulnerabilities. And there's also this aspect of security vulnerabilities are introduced all the time because every software developer is also not a security engineer or a security expert. And so the resources needed to monitor for all those things in this thing that you got off the shelf for free and started building your application on are really not well understood. And there's really no great solutions for tracking the risks that those things present. So that leads a bit to our ethos and our adoption of AI that we've tried to take at a high level when developing Ranger from 1.0 into Ranger.ai, right? And this is leveraging some of the impressive abilities of Agentic AI to recognize, automate, and scale the human security expertise we already have here at NARF into helping out with understanding and mitigating that risk that our customers see by leveraging this $9 trillion investment in open source software. So how do we get there, right? Today, we've successfully released and are working on follow-on contracts for 2 initial customers for Ranger 1.0. We did that with leveraging about $4 million in DARPA funding over the years to build out this capability. We also have worked closely with some Air Force personnel as an initial customer for this that have validated this is real and valuable, and have a continuing need for all the features and functionality that's been implemented in the 1.0. But we can do better. We can take it farther. We are really expanding on this Agentic AI idea and its ability to scale to actually extend the value that we've seen with our government customers beyond Ranger 1.0 into something that really appeals to a commercial market that also depends and builds heavily on open source software. So we've taken this from a scanner, and some very well understood statistical and machine learning techniques. We're trying to take it into a suite of AI agents that really adapts and scales to meet the risk profile here. We've also produced a lot of really interesting, really highly technical data that our friends over at the Air Force and other initial customers appreciate, but that ultimately is not actionable by somebody who's not trained and not deeply steeped in the idea of picking up these open source dependencies and keeping them secure. And we want to more comprehensively address this problem of being able to take advantage of this $9 trillion investment in open source software and make it safer to build on for companies of all shapes and sizes, not only government. And here's what we hear from our initial customers, right? From those at the Air Force, they're responsible for a repository and record of safe open source software, or what they consider safe, and trying to manage some of the security risks that are presented. However, they're trying to do this across approximately 6,000 open source software projects, and they're trying to do this with a staff of 30 people who are very skilled, but I don't know if there's enough hours in the day without great tooling and without Agentic AI assistance to scale their efforts to over 6,000 open source projects that they need to monitor for security flaws. The other challenge we've heard from these customers is that security patches from what's called upstream. So, if you're dependent on these open source projects, you are downstream from them and they are upstream from you. And waiting for security patches from a volunteer effort or something that may not be prioritizing your risk profile and the security vulnerabilities in their product that are affecting you, it ends up being slow, manual, and likely incomplete, especially when you've got attackers taking advantage of it quickly. This isn't a direct open source project, but if you all heard about the recent attacks on Microsoft SharePoint, it's interesting to note there that attackers were able to understand and weaponize the flaw found in SharePoint in a matter of hours. And we had, within the first 24 hours, victims with SharePoint servers actually being ransomed out there and having their data encrypted, their SharePoint services offline, and being extorted for Bitcoin within 24 hours of that flaw landing. So it is quite a tight timeline for fixing some of these issues. And one of the things we talk about on the product team is we want to end up what's called left of CVE, right? We'd like to use the scale and the speed of Agentic AI to understand these flaws and be able to present patches for them before the attackers can make it. The other things we hear from our initial a different type of customer, but we're working with a large government IT services and system integrator. They manage billions in government contracts for secure compute cluster operations, and they deliver most of those technologies and most of that compute cluster with open source software. So they've really had their eyes opened as to the backgrounds of the contributors behind that software, and how our agentic platform can scale to meet those challenges that they have to maintain the security of that infrastructure. So we're working on partnership right there with them to deliver, millions more in joint revenue, surrounding the safe deployment and safe building upon these open source technologies. We'll get to that in a bit. So, sorry, Michael, I'll jump in. Is there anything I've missed in sort of your last year working with our Air Force customer that you kind of want to highlight?
No, those a pretty good description. I will add, right, as you've kind of communicated, intimated here, like we are intensely focused on identifying actionable threat intelligence about this supply chain. And if you think of the supply chain as a conveyor belt, right, someone like the Air Force customer with their couple of teams of 14 people is way downstream from where software is manufactured. And the important thing to realize is that every step of that conveyor belt, there's a black curtain that's between you and whoever produced it, packaged it, touched it, slipped something into the box, slapped a new label on it. And so parts of that supply chain are very opaque. And unfortunately, the folks all the way at the end of that conveyor belt are pushing on a rope, right? If they want to make changes, as you said, upstream or push a patch, they don't have a lot of control, right? There's a volunteer effort upstream. And they can't even sometimes do things for themselves because they don't have enough information about what the impact of a change might be, or if there is a flaw or threat there that's worth addressing. So that's the kind of tooling we're building. But the worm in the apple is the scale, right? You mentioned 6,000 projects. If each of those projects is run by a single other person, that's 6,000 other contributors. Understand, our data set has like 9.3 million, right? So understanding all of that is just impossible for a team of 30 people, and that's why we need to leverage the AI as something that can consume work and really rapidly triage a lot of that info.
Yeah, exactly right. So let's get into a bit about what this platform entails, what it is, right? And it is three things at its surface, right? One is this is the Agentic AI platform for open source security operations. So if you want to consume and build upon open source software and you want to do it safely, this is the platform for you. And the reason for that is we get to scale past this bespoke human security expertise with something that's sort of always awake and can review contributions at any time of day, anywhere, made to this open source software. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of automation in how open source software is built upon, and new software from enterprises and all these teams gets released, right? And that automation automatically incorporates the latest changes from some random guy on the internet into your shipping product, right? If you're doing it right and in a modern way. So it's really helpful to be able to identify the vulnerable pieces of these dependencies wherever they may be, and to do it rapidly. And we simply can't scale that out with human expertise. And I missed talking about this a little bit earlier, but this software is often shipped in something called containers. So if you've heard of something called Docker, or this idea of shipping software for running in a cloud or a cluster, it's often done in these containers. And these containers are automatically built with all this downstream software and deployed often without a human in the loop. So we need to have agentic capabilities to actually remediate vulnerabilities in these containers before they make it into production, right? We call this internally something called left of CVE. And CVE is this public notification that there's a vulnerability somewhere in a piece of proprietary open source code, right? Ideally, we would like to produce software containers that never have that vulnerability present, because agents out there have read the code contribution, understood why it's bad, presented a patch, and fixed it automatically for our customers before it makes it into production. So all this leads to, we're also running a platform that's able to collect data on what our customers care about and what software containers are really, really critical to them, right? So not only do we need to know that a customer consumes and builds upon a specific software container, right? But how critical is that to their operations and their infrastructure, right? Is it a software container that's running the drink fridge in their office so they get free beer on Fridays after work? Or Is it a software container that's running on thousands of CPUs across various data centers? And if there's a vulnerability or an issue with that container, it brings down their entire financial and revenue operations for days at a time, which loses, on order of millions per day in their large scale operation. So we have this really great data capture platform for not only do we understand the issues and the landscape of how open source software is developed and used by our customers, but we want to understand the scale with which it's used and the criticality it has within our customer environment. And this is really a great platform for capturing that data and understanding where we should be suggesting that customer make their investments in securing their open source consumption. And the last thing is a sales conduit, right? So we talked earlier about this large system integrator that we're already working with on these topics, and obviously we're trying to reduce the issues that can be used in their service delivery because they're using open source software to do it, right? But they also have very sensitive downstream government clients, right, who are interested in hardening and really making these systems that they already buy from the system integrator more robust, while still leveraging that open source investment, right? So we're looking at this as a sales conduit for these system integrators where they can take the really critical pieces of this stack that have been written in, in the open source world and actually generate a lot of revenue, taking over stewardship for some of these open source projects and making sure they're really, really safe to consume for their downstream consumers, and making sure they answer some regulatory questions about being built in the EU or the Western, sort of the Western allies structure, or being built in the US or the UK or anywhere else where it's critical that some of these critical components be onshored, right? You've seen onshoring as kind of a continuing trend in our current hectic economic environment. So we'll talk a bit about the roadmap for this and a little bit more detail about these two initial customers. So we plan 2 launch customers for this. We've already been working with the Air Force. We are starting work with this major system integrator, and we expect to be able to announce larger ongoing engagements with both of these entities in Q4. Now, if you ask why Q4, why hasn't it been Q2? Well, if you can predict the government budget cycles and what's been going on with the new administration better than I can, my email inbox is always open, and I would love to hear your sources of information. But for now, we expect that now that the big beautiful bill has been passed, we expect to see the contracting officers be able to deploy some of those funds, both very, very quickly to meet year-end, September 30th deadlines for spending FY25 money that has been unspent in the government up until now, as well as this newer fiscal year money that's often committed in the September to October timeframe. Now, we've already pushed out budgets for the next year of Ranger 1.0 and Ranger AI capabilities for these 2 launch customers, and received head nods and definite, yes, we need this. We are just waiting on government funds to be released from their various contracting officers. As an interesting aside, we learned the other day that the folks at Health and Human Services are actually using the Department of the Interior, which is responsible for our national parks in the U.S., to commit money to cybersecurity efforts. So Smokey the Bear is now our contracting officer in a couple cases, not in these cases, but this just kind of gives you an interesting aside as to what's going on in government. So we expect those launch customers to, these budgets we submitted, they are for 3 things. They're largely for platform access and design partner status around, contributing to the roadmap and understanding what we need to build for them quickly. And they're also getting access to our security team. That's about 30% of the budget. So our human security team is paired with these agentic AI workflows and is available to basically respond to any vulnerabilities that are found by our agentic AI flows, as well as help remediate them in the customer's environment. Because remember earlier, we talked about one of our key customers has about 30 people to respond to these incidents. Oftentimes those 30 people do not have the breadth of experience that NARF security engineers have with patching various open source projects in various programming languages against a myriad of threats. So I'll talk three areas in which we're building and deploying agents in the product. I'll talk about the first one. I'll hand it over to Greg halfway through the second one to talk about them. And Michael, if you want to follow up and talk about the bigger trends and the excitement on the team and understanding, really how we get to scale out our expertise without, submitting Greg, Stuart, and others for cloning duties. So the first place we use our agentic workflow and workforce rather that we're building is in understanding the infrastructure and the project dynamics behind this open source software. This was the original use case for Ranger 1.0. So this idea that we needed to perform very, very high level and very, very broad based health checks on projects, on open source projects that our customers have come to depend on. So a great example here, if you've come to depend on a road or bridge, right? It's useful to understand if the company behind maintaining that road or bridge is still solvent and doing it well, right? So really what we built and a lot of what our launch customers are relying on in Ranger 1.0 is this ability to understand the health of these critical projects and to be able to intervene by what's called forking the project or taking it over in the event that, the maintainer gets hit by a bus or it becomes critical to national security, or generally they just really need more help, securing that open source dependency because it's become such a critical part of what we're doing. This has really allowed us to identify and sort of map out what a national strategic reserve of good software developers that can work on this critical infrastructure looks like. And it's one of the data assets we've built up as part of this Ranger 1.0 work. So the customer impact to date on this has been huge. And mainly it's been, hey, we're able to notify them that this critical thing you depend on that's in all your software, it's having some maintenance troubles and it's having some, for lack of a better term, solvency issues that we need to address right now. And giving them a support plan or giving them a roadmap to addressing what we call abandonware, right? This is software that you depend on that's been abandoned and no one's maintaining it anymore, which obviously is not good in any type of infrastructure. So that leads us to the really something we stumbled on with working with the Air Force and some of our key customers. They're very interested in knowing about the backgrounds and who's contributing this critical infrastructure. And we found some surprising things for them here. And I'll turn it over to Greg in a second. But I think generally using these agentic processes, we've been able to, as Michael said earlier, if every one of those 6,000 projects only had one developer, we really want to understand the background, where that developer was educated, who he works for, is he in an adversarial country that has influence over him or can, knock on his door and say, you shall insert this code or else. We really want to understand that background behind the developer because they can pass on potential security vulnerabilities to people that really depend on their code as critical. And I'll pass it over, Greg, and kind of let you speak to, how we think of developer backgrounds and how we're using the agentic framework to rapidly understand and spot problems.
Yeah, so this is really we're trying to in understanding these software systems. We're really trying to answer the who, what, where, when, why questions here. And in answering the who, I think we're trying to put some shape around who is this developer other than having some email address on GitHub, for example. So we want to know a little bit about where was this person educated? Where has this person worked? Where do they currently work? All of these things indicate not only what their piece might be in this specific software project, but also what is the potential quality of the code that they're committing to this project. Do they have the necessary skills to be working on, for example, the cryptography in a specific piece of software? And if so, how is that quantifying all of this by looking at all of these inputs is something is the effort we're trying to capture here in describing the who. Of course, you can't do a full background check on each person, but if you are able to leverage LLMs and the agentic workflow, you're able to do this at scale intelligently. So you can look at the 150,000 developers that are contributing to your 6,000 software packages that are running in your cluster. This is a novel and a very new sort of ability here. This is not something we've had even a year ago. So I think the ability to understand a large-scale problem here with the use of these tools is giving us a leg up in understanding the who here.
And I think to add to that, some of our initial customers, we know that these findings that we've produced on developer backgrounds and the degree to which certain projects and certain components of critical infrastructure and OSS that they rely on have a degree of adversarial participation that's uncomfortable, right? And being able to quantify that and present an agentically generated plan for minimizing that has been really critical and valuable to them. And we're looking forward, especially in Q4, to really extending that work and rapidly showing that return on investment for them, which we think will unlock, frankly, larger efforts and larger budgets from those customers. So next we'll move to another agentic workflow that we have in place, and we're looking at really expanding on behalf of our customers, is this idea of real-time security reviews. So, a developer in open source land contributes a new piece of code. Remember that if you're depending on that piece of code, it's oftentimes automatically included in your next production release. So it'd be really great to know if there's any security impact, either positive or negative, for that. And Greg, do you kind of want to give a couple bullets on how we're doing this today and scaling it?
Yeah. This goes to understanding the what here, right? The ingredients of your software package, which at the end of the day, the ingredients here are source code. And like Steve already said, the volume and velocity of this source code that is pouring in as these packages and these software products are being built is immense. So, again, being able to leverage LLMs and agentic workflows here really allows us to scale. And not only scale, but scale in a intelligent fashion, or simulated intelligence, depending on where you sit on that spectrum. But I'm able to take a source code review that I might do on, let's say, 100 lines of code that would take me an hour, and I'm able to scale that out across all of the software packages that I'm interested in looking at automatically by assigning an agent who encapsulates the review that I would do across all of those packages. So this allows us to really cover a lot of ground here. We have a couple numbers in here. If we could look at 100,000 commits in a day, where a human might be able to look at 10. And in sort of working through this with some of the data sets that we've used so far, taking a small sample of contributions, in this case, like looking at 20,000 contributions, using AI and an agentic sort of approach here, we were able to find 750 of those, which sounds like a small number, but it's not trivial in the big picture. 750 of those contributions introduced a potential security issue. that would then feed into the customer's upstream system, potentially causing a problem. And what another thing this sort of AI approach allows us to do is we can produce concise, focused, and very audience-specific outputs for the client. So the client isn't one person. The client consists of a whole stack here, everything from the executive to the management to operations down to the developers. And we're able, by assigning different agents to different tasks, we're able to create different outputs for those different audiences. And yeah, we have this idea of a software nutrition facts. We're basically just playing on this idea that your software has ingredients, and here's a quick label that we're all conditioned to look at, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Well, here's what makes up your software, and here's some things that are standard across all software, and here's something that's really specifically interesting about this piece of software that you might care about.
Hey, Steve, I just wanted to pop in real quick. We've got probably about 15 minutes left here. The presentation's been great. I think people have gotten a dive. Let's spend some time on this next slide of yours, which is the giving an understanding of kind of the go-to-market and expectations. I've been looking at a lot of the questions that have been coming in. So let's spend some time on this next slide.
Sure. So we spent a while talking about, some of the agentic processes that we're already running. I really think the thing that we didn't highlight so much is not only is this providing alerting and information to our downstream customers, right? But a lot of our planning and our roadmap here is to turn these findings or these alerts into actual remediations, right? So actual fixes, actual defenses for the downstream clients themselves, right? So I'll walk you through the roadmap a bit in the sort of near to midterm here. Obviously, we talked about having those initial 2 customers onboarded to the Ranger.ai features, as well as being able to announce contracts within Q4 on those 2 initial starts. Now, this is really useful because this gets us in keeps us in a daily cadence of providing basically these agentic outputs and NARF security staff, as well as our agents delivering results to these guys. I don't know if whoever's controlling the deck right now, please leave it here. Onboarding those initial 2 customers, as well as pushing that AI roadmap forward, is sort of on our very near term. Now, next year, early, we would like to release some tooling that sort of brings in a freemium model, right? So this is the idea of all this great work that Agentic solutions are doing, monitoring this open source field of play and all this critical infrastructure. We'd like to be able to understand, help commercial clients understand all the risk that's cropping up in their infrastructure because of that, right? Now, the free part of that will be helping them sort of understand at a high level that sort of nutrition facts, right? Here's what's going on in your infrastructure because you're using open source today, right? If you'd like the fixes and continued vigilance past this point security scan, you need to get in touch and become a paying customer. But that's a good way of sort of accelerating the lead generation in the commercial space while making sure that everything we've developed for sort of government or government flavored customers here, to include civilian agencies, to include federal, is also applicable in the commercial world. That sort of gives way in the in the second quarter to really offering agentic remediation services, right? So having AI actually write and deploy the patches surrounding the issues it's finding. I can't understate how huge of a capability that would be, right? As Greg said earlier, that 750 number out of 20,000 reviews seems like a small amount. But when you actually talk about the work required to make sure those security vulnerabilities are closed in customer infrastructure, it's significant. And when we're really leveraging AI to make that less of a lift and less of a hairy problem. We've talked previously about partnerships with larger entities and really scaling our offerings out through those entities. Our initial target for this, is in line to be initial customer in Q4 this year. But they've really bought into this vision of us being able to drive joint revenue through partnerships with them. So every time they have to fix a open source infrastructure security bug in a classified environment, in a critical cluster, right? Obviously, they'll have the infrastructure, the boots on the ground, the bodies to be able to affect that in that air-gapped environment. But we will definitely have the software and the AI processes that makes that repeatable and scalable with their existing workforce to the tune of good revenue numbers. And that sort of goes into 27, which is really taking advantage of this platform we've built, this data we've collected, right? And really trying to move towards this bigger idea of doing AGI-like things in cybersecurity with this fleet of agents who are able to identify security vulnerabilities and remediate them in third time and priority there. So I'll pause there with sort of the overview of our roadmap. And John, if you want to direct me to any specific questions that you think we should be queuing up.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate that, Steve. And great job, team, on getting through this. I think it really gave people a good update on kind of the journey. Steve, a lot of the questions are coming from, and maybe you addressed it before, but let's hit on it. Size of contracts. When I talk with you and the team, you kind of have this feeling that it's, each of the contracts is going to be about, low seven figures. That it's going to be a combination maybe of 35% one-time work, let's say, for some of these initial government customers. And when we talk about these initial government customers, we're talking about really heavy DoD intelligence community customers that we're connected with. So right now, Steve's identified a couple that are out there. The expectation is there's 5 to 10 of these low-hanging fruit. That doesn't mean they happen tomorrow, but that we kind of get our credibility allows us to be swept up into that. And so I think the idea is staying within the people that we can reference right now and to others that are very close to them. Pick up, over the next year, these next 5 to 10 customers with that, low seven figures activity, and that once that momentum gets going, that as we enter calendar year 27, we're really positioned to expand along with these strategic relationships. We've got one strategic relationship going. I'll tell you, it's a $7 billion company today, so it's not a small integrator. There are probably 3 or 4 more integrators like that as the team gets going here, they'll be able to reach out to. And so I think that's kind of the scalability of what we're seeing right now. You want to expand on that, Steve, or does that capture it enough for you?
Yeah, I think so. And through those integrators, as well as some of the bigger direct ones with ones like Air Force, right? I think we trend, towards the higher 6 to 7 figures in these initial stages, and who knows where it goes after that, especially as we start turning over these issues. Just to give a number on it, with like those 750 issues, right? I could see the integrators generating, tens of millions of dollars on fixing pervasive issues in that 750 for these customers, right? So obviously we will be right there in that journey and providing both the leads to fix those issues, as well as some of the deep technical expertise. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, great. One of the other questions that we got is, have we totally abandoned R&D projects out there? And I know Michael is wincing when he probably hears that, because Michael is very involved with getting bids in. And like I said, you will see that, out of a current backlog, which I was talking about, that does not, include any of the Ranger AI activities at this stage. Michael's team is in that area is delivering about $4 and $4.5 million in this coming fiscal year. So I think that's pretty key. Michael, I think maybe you can just quickly talk about being more focused, right? R&D, not for R&D's sake, right? That it really is a building block, and that's a key part of your strategy and in helping us move to this product.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. And I think that myself and the rest of the team actually appreciate the opportunity to focus on building a thing that's exciting and take advantage of a lot of the advancements in AI and stuff. So as we all know, the research dollars are very tough to come by, extremely competitive, and they're sort of a one for one. You put $1 in, maybe get some value out the other end, but they're really tough to get, really tough to keep, and very uncertain. So I think we look forward to focusing on this particular capability, particularly because there are some very obvious places where this can be a receptor for some of our past research work and techniques.
Yeah. Stuart, I want to give you a chance to hop in here. Stuart is one of our newer hires, i.e. 2 years. So that's new for NARF. We have a very dedicated team. They've been together over a number of years. Stuart was one of our first hires that was brought in to help with project and product management. And he comes from a background of having done that. And he's the one that's hopped on. He's been very active with our customer in the Air Force activities. And Stuart, can you just real quickly, we talk about Platform One and Iron Bank, right? I don't think people understand that it's just not one customer that's potentially there. The breadth of Platform One. Can you just address that real quick and the activities you've got going on to now get this product out to all these other relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Platform One serves as both a point for upstream vendors and providers of intelligence and containers, but they're really the holder of containers for the DoD and for other agencies that want to rapidly set up in new software environments, take on these pieces of software and understand that they're coming from a trusted embedded source. So when they go to Platform One and they're using Platform One, or they're using their containers and tools, they have a sense of trust that they're coming from a secure place. And that's been the key component of our relationship with Platform One, is enhancing that posture of their security.
Thanks. So, I think as I kind of looked through the questions, tried to task the team here to summarizing them. We'll final close out just getting back to kind of the health of the company and where it is. I've been very impressed with Steve and the team and the commitment that they have. It is a solid, committed team. They've been through a tough period of managing resources. They're coming out of it. They've done a great job. They complied with the board's direction of, get out there and stay within your bounds. So we're very pleased with that. Right now, with the execution that we have and with Agentic AI, we kind of are within our bounds, within our current financial profile to be able to deliver on those things as we've talked about here. In respect to expanding, we are looking at strategic partnerships, and we'll continue to look at those and to leverage the resources and funds if we need it from those people. We don't want to give up equity at this stage. We'd probably rather give up some percentage points on, pricing to a partner rather than giving up equity. So that's kind of the strategy you're going to see us continuing to pursue. No question we could go faster with additional equity, but until we're able to show you all the traction here and gain your confidence on where we're going, we've got our hands full plugging away with what we've got here. All right, I think we're coming up to the hour here. Steve, let me turn it over to you to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks, John. No, I just want to echo, I think we're pretty excited about, where the agentic technologies and frameworks have gotten to in the last year. We're really seeing an acceleration of being able to leverage them on our problem and our customers' problem set. I'm also excited about some of these strategic relationships that we're forming now, because we're definitely first in the door, and we're definitely very far ahead on the solution and the problem that we're addressing for these guys, which is sorely needed for them. So I want to thank the team for getting on early and explaining their components of things. Looking forward to getting back to work on this, and we'll have some follow-up announcements, as they come on these initial customers and what else is going on here at NARF.
And one last item, I kind of see in this forum that a number of questions we didn't get to, but that we can answer them here maybe after we're done online and to wrap them up here. But in any event, we'll try to get to them all. Alessandro, I think we're all set here. Is there anything you need to do on your side to wrap up?
No, well, that's great. Just thank you very much for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session, as you now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. On behalf of the management team of NARF Industries PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.